If you're a dissident in Russia, if you defect from Russia, if you turn against Putin in Russia, doesn't matter if you are no longer in Russia, he will send assassination teams anywhere in the world and hunt you down. So there's a clear message here, obviously, right? Don't be a Russian dissident. Anywhere in the world, at least that's the very clear message from Vladimir Putin. The message from the rest of the world, of course, is do please be a Russian dissident, because the world needs you to. Because Vladimir Putin, now in his 25th year in power, is not someone for whom his ambitions or the damage he's willing to impose are things that are confined by Russia's borders. He operates anywhere in the world, doing whatever he wants. It's like he can't try any harder to make clear that this is a whole world problem now. Let me show you part of a report that Richard Engel aired tonight on NBC Nightly News. Watch this.
The Ukrainians broadcast warnings, telling Russian troops to stop shelling at the risk of a nuclear disaster. The warnings went unheeded. Russian troops occupied the plant and the territory around it. Ukrainian forces held on to the far bank of the Dnieper River, leaving the nuclear power station right on the front line. 2 years on, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has inspectors at the plant, is sounding the alarm.
You're responsible for nuclear security all around the world.
Yes.
Is this the most dangerous nuclear facility on the planet right now?
It's the most dangerous situation that we have. It's my job not to, panic, but at the same time, I have to tell the truth of what is happening.
Nuclear experts point to three main dangers. First, a military strike on the plant, either accidental or deliberate. Second, a power cut. The plant's 6 uranium reactors require electricity for cooling, but Ukrainian officials say 3 of the 4 power lines are damaged, and the 4th is faulty. There have already been 8 blackouts, as recently as December.
When you have a blackout, the cooling function of the reactors is lost, and you could have a meltdown.
And finally, it's understaffed. Ukrainians say the Russians have been abusing employees. 11,000 people worked at the plant before. Only 4,000 work there now.
In Moscow.
Irina Kokot is responsible for radiation detection for the Ukrainian government. Her office predicts how, if there was a meltdown, a cloud of radioactive particles would spread across much of Ukraine and neighboring countries.
This is Istanbul, right here,
Yes.
the city of Istanbul.
Yeah, this Istanbul.
Contaminated the entire city of Istanbul on the Black Sea. It's a catastrophe, a total catastrophe.
She says the fallout would last up to 100 years.
A nuclear disaster here would be felt around the world and leave large parts of Ukraine and beyond uninhabitable.
That is part of what Putin is bringing to bear on the rest of the world right now. You may also have seen the news just a few days ago, which started off as a sort of cryptic warning from the Intelligence Committee in the House and its Republican chairman about some kind of grave new national security threat from Russia that the American government needed to be addressing and talking to Congress about. It started off with that cryptic letter from the House Intelligence Committee chairman. It was soon reported all over the place that the point of concern was Russia developing a new nuclear capability that they would deploy in space, a nuclear weapon. They have thousands of nuclear weapons just like we do, except this one would be put into orbit around the Earth. So it could strategically be detonated to wipe out satellites orbiting the planet, which would have the effect down here on Earth of wiping out not only communications technology, but like navigation and military capabilities like missile defense. The New York Times summed it up like this, quote, global communication systems would fail, making everything from emergency services to cell phones to the regulation of generators and pumps go awry. Quote, debris from the explosion would scatter throughout low Earth orbit and make navigation difficult, if not impossible, for everything from Starlink satellites used for internet communications to spy satellites. So here's the game plan, right? We'll assassinate our enemies anywhere on Earth, including in Western Europe and even the United States, by any means we choose, including by the use of military-grade nerve agents that we will dump willy-nilly in civilian areas, thus killing bystanders. We will bring a war inside the gates of one of the world's largest active nuclear plants, threatening a continent-wide, century-long radiation disaster, and no one and nothing is allowed to protect that site. We'll do what we want with it. And we'll put nuclear weapons in orbit around the Earth for the first time in human history. So we have the power to knock out not just like your GPS and your cell phones, but your emergency systems and your power grids and your water systems and everything else. Oh, and we'll invade Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014 and Ukraine again in 2022. We'll get Europe back into the game of large land wars for the first time since World War II. At the Munich Security Conference this weekend in Germany, NATO's Secretary General shared new NATO intelligence. He repeatedly shared new NATO intelligence that they believe what Putin intends to do next is try an attack on one of the smaller NATO countries on its border. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Baltic states, they are all NATO members. New NATO intelligence says that Putin's next designs are on one of them. If he indeed attacks one of them, which NATO now says they think he is planning on, that would bring Russia into war with all 31 countries that are part of the NATO alliance, which includes a little country called the United States of America. There is not another entity like this on Earth. There is not another country on Earth that is doing anything like this. There is not another leader on Earth that is doing anything like this. And so what do we do about it? What do we, the United States, do about it? What does the world do about it? This is what the Russian embassy in London looks like in normal times on a normal day. This is what it looked like this weekend. On the right side of your screen, that's what it looked like this weekend after Putin killed Russia's charismatic, creative opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, at the age of 47 at a Siberian prison camp. At the Russian embassy in London, they projected this image of Navalny onto the side of the building. You see it takes up basically the whole side of the Russian embassy. There are Russian embassies all over the world this weekend, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, as far away as India, at the Russian consulate in New York, at the Russian embassy in D.C. People left flowers and signs in Alexei Navalny's name. Inside Russia, anybody leaving flowers or leaving signs or even just showing up in public to pay their respects, for most of the weekend, they got beaten up and hauled off by police. Hundreds of people arrested this weekend, literally for laying flowers in public or for holding a sign with Navalny's name on it. In Munich, at that International Munich Security Conference, right after Vice President Kamala Harris spoke about the need for the world to help Ukraine defend itself against this now 2-year-long Russian invasion, Alexei Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalny, appeared without announcement after Vice President Harris spoke. She appeared to everyone's surprise, making unannounced remarks, asking the world to stand up, to stand together, to fight against the Putin regime in Russia. Then this weekend, she posted this sort of stunning, straight-to-camera video in Russian saying that she is not afraid, that she will carry on her husband's work. She said that will start by naming and showing the faces soon of the people who carried out the murder of her husband at that prison camp. She said people do not need to be afraid. They need to do everything they can to fight against Putin's regime. And of course, we have to wonder if she is now marking herself for death as well by stepping forward into that kind of a role now that her husband has been killed for it. The whole world needs for there to be Russian dissidents because the world needs for Russia to change. The whole world needs for there to be Russian dissidents and needs for them to not only survive, but ultimately to win because of the incredible threat, an increasing threat, an increasingly aggressive and unconstrained threat that Putin poses to the rest of the world as long as he remains in charge of Russia. On Friday, a New York judge ordered Trump himself to pay more than $450 million, including interest, in a civil fraud case involving his real estate businesses. But don't worry, if that sounds like a lot of money, a new GoFundMe campaign has raised $500,000 already to help the former president toward that end. More than $27 million in Trump campaign fundraising went to his legal fees just in the last half of last year alone. Now that Trump's working to put his own people in charge of the National Republican Party, some senior Republicans are saying they're worried he'll end up tapping Republican Party coffers as well. The prospect keeping many people up at night, though, is the idea that it will be a foreign government, some sort of foreign entity, perhaps even a hostile one, that could decide they'll just cover it all. How would that fit with Trump's announced plans for a second term and for his strongman style of promised governance? Our next guest studies the relationship between corruption and foreign influence being openly bought, between those perils and the idea of authoritarian governance. Ruth Ben-Ghiat is a professor of history at NYU. She's the author of an essential book on authoritarianism called Strongmen, Mussolini, From Mussolini to the Present. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, it's really a pleasure to have you here. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
The prospect of massive foreign support for a president who's in serious financial trouble feels like a very singular thing that we've never faced before in the United States. But the way you write about money and corruption and its relation to authoritarianism in your book makes me think that this is not something necessarily that should be seen in isolation to Trump here, but maybe should be seen as more a larger part of the authoritarian project.
Yes, exactly. Trump is what we call a personalist ruler, meaning he personalizes politics. And holding public office, or running for office in this case, the goal of it is, and the party and government agencies, they're supposed to solve the leader's personal, legal, and financial problems. So holding office is a mechanism of self-enrichment, and so is running a campaign in this case. And Trump, in that sense, is very similar to other authoritarians. At its most extreme, like in Putin's Russia, you have a kleptocracy. But what we have here is a party mechanism, as Lara Trump is saying, that every penny has to go of the RNC and donors to, electing Trump and solving his financial problems. And sadly and disgracefully, the RNC was already doing this. It's incredible, Rachel, that a whole year after the election, the 2020 election, the RNC was paying Trump's personal legal bills. And so this is an example of the personalization of power, where there's no division or recognition of the difference between public and private. And so when Trump says openly that he received, millions from the Chinese to his businesses while he was president for, quote, services, and he says this openly, he's telling you that he embraces that conception of power.
Does it have to work only on his supporters so that they will give him their own money? Or does it also have to work in such a way that, as you say, even foreign money, even obviously corrupting foreign influence funneled as money to the leader personally, has to be made into a political virtue as well?
Yes, it has to be both. And the key here is the Republican Party that is a linchpin of this. It is a willing accomplice to Trump's, financial corruption, and it was okay with him, hiring his family, Jared Kushner, in power, and is not doing anything to stand up for the division between personal and political. Indeed, is embracing this kind of authoritarian leader cult, where Trump can do whatever he says, and says that Putin can do whatever he says as well. So it can be hard for Americans to understand, because it's a completely proprietary vision of power, that everything is for your taking. Everything is yours. There's a kind of megalomania. And that's how you can end up with highly classified government documents in the bathroom of your private residence, or think it's okay to say that the Chinese gave my businesses millions of dollars for, quote, services. Most people who are Democrats would not say such things, but for Trump, it's a boast. And this is why he admires Xi Jinping and Putin, because they get away with things like that. It's been very open, the corruption, and corruption is institutionalized. And that's what he would like America to be like if he comes back to the White House.
For years now, for more than a decade, Democrats in the state of Wisconsin have been trying to level the playing field in Wisconsin politics. Even when Wisconsin Democrats have won statewide in recent years, turfing out the Republican governor, Scott Walker, for example, in 2018, even when Wisconsin Democrats have gotten way more votes for state assembly, say in 2018, when they got 54% of the vote of state assembly votes, even when they've been outvoting Republicans that clearly, Democrats have been getting way less when it comes to seats in the state legislature. In that 2018 race, Democrats won the total vote for state assembly by a margin of more than 200,000 votes. But Republicans still got more seats. Democrats won 54% of the votes for state assembly, but that 54% of the vote only earned them 36% of the seats. Ever since Wisconsin Republicans got control of their state government in 2010, they have redrawn the political maps, the state legislature and the congressional maps, so that Republicans effectively can't be voted out of power. So they can win more seats from Wisconsin despite getting fewer votes from Wisconsin. I mean, in Wisconsin, it's the Democrats who have won 14 out of 17 of the last statewide elections. But Republicans consistently win more seats, even though they've got fewer votes. The state consistently votes overall for Democrats, most recently in the 2022 election. But Republicans, nevertheless, got nearly 2/3 of seats in the state assembly and a full 2/3 of the seats in the state Senate. For the past 13 years in Wisconsin, the bottom line is that Democrats can basically win as many votes as they want, but those votes will not put them into power in the state. And for years, Wisconsin Democrats have been trying to fix that, have been trying to level the playing field again, so that what people vote for is what they get in terms of state government. In 2017, Wisconsin Democrats brought a legal challenge to the Republican-drawn maps all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, but that got swatted down. In 2022, following his reelection, Democratic Governor Tony Evers was able to push through revised maps, not quite ungerrymandered, but a step in a less gerrymandered direction. The U.S. Supreme Court threw those out, too. Finally, it was what happened last year that changed the course in Wisconsin. After dogged campaigning and organizing by the Democrats, Wisconsin voters elected a new liberal judge to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And that effectively flipped control of the court to the liberals. And Wisconsin voters then filed a new lawsuit arguing that the Republican maps were illegal. The state Supreme Court agreed, and they ordered new maps for Wisconsin. New, fair, ungerrymandered maps that meant the playing field would not be tilted in either party's direction. Today, just today, 13 years after this all started, Governor Evers has signed new state maps into law, maps that will effectively end Republican gerrymandering and give equal party a fair shot at trying to control the legislature in that state. It took 13 years of perseverance by Wisconsin Democrats. But those old, unbelievably outrageous Republican maps are finally gone, which means when Republican or Democratic voters go to the polls in Wisconsin, however they vote will now be reflected in their state government. Shocking, I know. Now, for now, these maps apply just to the state legislature. On the congressional level, it's still the way it was. There's a fairly evenly split electorate in Wisconsin. It is a purple state. But even so, because the congressional maps are still gerrymandered under the old system, of the 8 seats that Wisconsin has in Congress, 6 of them are held by Republicans. Now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court hasn't yet decided whether they're going to take up a legal challenge to the congressional maps as well as the legislative maps that they just did take up the challenge for. But you can expect that to be the next battle, and you can expect Wisconsin Democrats to fight as hard for that as they have for these past 13 years.